here is a question. What happens when a person can't keep a job because the employer keeps moving the schedule around on them? Will they be protected by unemployment insurance? A new study came out recently about that, and here to join us is Ari Schwartz. Ari is the lead organizer of DC Jobs for Justice, and he's been thinking about this issue a fair amount. So, Ari, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be on. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. Now, listen, so what's the short answer? Are people getting the treatment they need, the protection they need from unemployment insurance, if in fact they find that this... first of all, let's back up a step, actually. It seems to me just that this kind of schedule shifting and manipulation of hours on the part of employers, particularly employers of lower income workers, has gotten worse and worse over the years. That they're kind of abusing the nature of the job market and the fact that people need jobs to kind of bounce their hours all over the place with no consideration to their personal lives. But that's just my observation. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, yeah, that's the trend that we've seen. And, we focus exclusively on Washington, D.C., but our partners around the country have been sharing stories of the same extent that employers, particularly in the service sector, food, retail, cleaning, but also in other sectors, have turned more and more to keeping a large contingent part-time workforce where they can shift people around day to day or week to week at their whim, essentially. Whereas in the past, people would have a stable schedule and hours that they could count on. So NELP's report that came out this week really shows the impact of that even after someone leaves a job where they don't have a stable schedule, where the changing nature of their schedule makes it even harder for them to draw unemployment. So we're seeing the spectrum of how these erratic schedules really turn people's lives upside down.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing, aside from the fact that it's just, to me, it's abusive behavior on the part of the employer, it seems to me that it must be really tough if you're trying to go to school, if you have small children. I can think of all sorts of situations where having to work 1 week midnight shift, 1 week morning shift, or maybe each day of the week a different shift really becomes impossible to handle. And if you can't do that, then every worker, is supposed to get unemployment insurance protection. But now this National Employment Law Project study, this NELP study, it suggests that that's not the case, right?
Right, it does. And what we find nationally is that 2/3 of people who make less than $10.10 an hour, there was a study done with that as a minimum wage threshold, are women. And we find the same thing in D.C., where most people who are working these low-paying jobs are women and people who have kids. So the impact of a schedule that changes every day or every week is that it's harder to arrange childcare. It's hard to know when you're going to be home for your kids and drop your kids off at school. It's harder to start a family. It's harder to work your way up a career ladder. So we're not just talking about this myth of young people getting their first job in the workforce, but these are the jobs that we're building our economies around and our societies around, and they're just not stable enough for people to work their way up in.
Right, and I don't remember the statistics now, but it seems to me there have also been studies by NELP and others showing that, that old cliche that you're talking about, that low income job, low wage jobs are, Johnny the teenager working at the malt shop after school. This kind of 1950s thing, that's completely obsolete, and that maybe 4 out of 5 workers in these jobs, let's say in the fast food industry, are adults. Yeah,
that's right. And in D.C., I can give you the exact stat since we just studied this year. In those types of jobs that you mentioned, retail and fast food and such, the median age of an employee in those industries is 36 years old. So right. You're talking about someone who needs to provide for a family, who needs to have a stable income, not somebody who is working after school in high school.
And we're talking with Ari Schwartz, lead organizer for DC Jobs with Justice. And the other aspect of that I think people don't reflect on enough is the fact that because you can't survive on these kinds of wages in many cases, on top of that, you probably need to work 2 jobs. And how can you work 2 jobs when one or both of them is just shifting around your schedule all day?
Right, that's exactly true. And what we're finding in Washington, D.C. is that a lot of people would like to work more hours than they get. So, economists call this involuntary part-time work, where someone, say, has a job at McDonald's, and they only get scheduled for 15 to 20 hours a week, whereas they'd like to work 40, and in effect they need to work more than that with the low wages they're earning. So we have a combination of people who are part-time against their will, and on top of that, the 20 hours that they may be getting every week is coming on different days or different times of the day, so that they can't go to a class in order to train for a better profession.
Yeah, that's a great point, that they can't actually even plan for a next phase of their life when they're being treated like this. They're working 20 hours, but they're basically on call 24 hours a day. So that's a great way to put it. I guess there are two sides then to this NELP study. One is that when the people just can't manage the job because they have children, they have to be at home at night or whatever the situation might be, and so they have to leave the job, they don't get unemployment insurance. I think that's part of what NELP found, right?
Right, that's exactly true.
So phase one is we've got to somehow agitate or demand an unemployment system that protects workers in this new, I'll coin a phrase, maybe someone else has too, but it's the on-call economy, where they expect you to be on call 24/7. Well, then we need unemployment insurance protection for the on-call economy. And the other piece of it is, don't we need to push back on, in different economies, when the job market is better and employers actually have to pursue employees, they can't get away with this. They have to pay better wages, and they can't jerk people around on their scheduling because they'll lose employees, and they need the employees. But in this market right now, how do we push back against this kind of abuse of, I consider it abuse anyway, of employees and their time?
Well, so you mentioned that we need to reform our unemployment insurance rules to reflect this new economy that is on call, that is just in time, as some people call it. And I think we need to do the same thing with how we set minimum standards for workers' rights on the job. We do that with the minimum wage. We do that increasingly with paid sick leave and with overtime. And now we need to move policymakers to start setting a minimum standard with how people get their schedules. And so we're looking to do that in Washington, D.C. San Francisco blazed the trail with that this past December when they passed the Retail Worker Bill of Rights, which guarantees people access to more hours, gives them advance notice of when they're going to have to come to work. So we need our legislatures and our policymakers to step up and say, this is an urgent crisis that we need to address with policy. And I think the second thing that I would say is we need to increase unionization in these industries that historically haven't had collective bargaining. So if you work at an apparel retail store, say the Gap, for instance, traditionally you are not expecting representation through a union. You're not going to have a voice on the job. But what we need to do now is give people the voice to say, I can't come into work just whenever my store manager wants me to because I'm raising a family on this salary, on this wage.
So workers, for lack of a better term, have to organize, and we have to help them do that, right? Okay, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because we're up against a hard stop. But Ari Schwartz, lead organizer of D.C. Jobs with Justice, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about this important issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.